The United States is suspending its participation in bilateral channels with Russia that were established to sustain the cessation of hostilities. This is not a decision we took lightly. The United States spared no effort in negotiating and attempting to implement an arrangement with Russia aimed at reducing violence, providing unhindered humanitarian access, and degrading terrorist organizations operating in Syria, including Daesh and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Unfortunately, Russia failed to live up to its own commitments, including its obligations under international humanitarian law and UN SCR 2254, and was also either unwilling or unable to ensure Syrian regime adherence to the arrangements to which Moscow agreed. Rather, Russia and the Syrian regime have chosen to pursue a military course inconsistent with the cessation of hostilities, is demonstrated by intensified attacks against civilian area, targeting of critical infrastructure such as hospitals, preventing humanitarian aid from reaching civilians in need. As noted in the statement, the U.S. will also withdraw personnel that have been dispatched in anticipation of the establishment of the Joint Implementation Center. To ensure the safety of our respective military personnel and enable the fight against Daesh, the U.S. will continue to utilize the channel of communications established with Russia to deconflict counterterrorism operations in Syria.
So, given that this is now a suspension of talks, does this mean full-blown military warfare going on both sides? Does this mean that the U.S. has also now looked at those options and is ready to move forward on the alternatives?
Well, you know, as the President said, we're always examining our approach. The National Security Council is pulled in views from across the entire interagency, and that's not just the diplomatic approach, where we've obviously been very focused, but also financial experts, military experts, intelligence experts. I'm not going to get ahead of next steps, but I will say, as we said last week, that those conversations have been going on.
What impact does this have then on the battleground? I mean, you've got the Syrian army backed by the Iranian backed militia. You've got the Russian airplanes. What impact is this going to have on fighting on the ground? Does the U.S. step up its support for the opposition? Do you try and push back on eastern Aleppo, try to hold that? How does this translate?
So I'm not going to get ahead of any sort of military decisions or frankly battlefield tactics that may be considered. You know, the focus that the U.S. has had is the fight against Daesh, and we remain committed. You know, I would say that, you know, you've seen tremendous gains within the last year on that. And also our focus to helping those most in need within Syria. You know, in terms of how this impacts the Russians' tactics, you know, you'd have to speak to the Russians. Clearly, they had not pulled back. Clearly, they had not stopped their attacks, nor had the regime. So that's a conversation I think you would have with them.
Would the U.S. push back at, for example, the Saudis or anyone else arming now really stepping up?
I wouldn't get into sort of that granular talks that we have with partners in the region. What I would say is what we said last week. You know, we're aware that partners and allies are taking a look at a number of options. We remain in close contact with them.
Yes, you said Russia did not live up to its obligations under the deal. Did the U.S. fully live up to its obligations?
We believe we did. As we said, though, your question, I think, is the marbleization of the opposition with Nusra. Am I leaning too far into that?
Did the U.S. separate the rebels from terrorists as it said it would?
As we talked about last week, you know, the United States continued to have detailed, ongoing discussions with members of the opposition, emphasizing our view on the importance of demarbalizing, of pulling part from Nusra. Our view on that is Nusra is Al-Qaeda in Syria. They are a terrorist group. As we said, it was never going to be fast. It was never going to be easy, and we were working hard towards that goal.
In the few days of the ceasefire, did the U.S. get leading rebel groups to abide by that ceasefire? Because right away, the second largest
one of the things that we've
group,
always been clear that if they were attacked, opposition groups have the right to defend themselves.
But they said right away that they were not going to abide by the ceasefire, and in fact,
and that was a conversation we had. And if they were attacked, they had a right to defend itself. Let's do one more, and then I'm going to move around.
Did you expect the unilateral ceasefire, considering the fact that the second largest rebel group right away from the beginning of the ceasefire refused to abide by it, specifically in Aleppo?
We expected good faith efforts from not only the opposition forces on the ground as we continue to have dialogue, but also Russia as a proponent of the September 9th ceasefire. So the September 9th agreement. So yeah, we did expect action.
If we go back to the deal on September 12th, what would have changed? Would the leading rebel groups abide by the ceasefire? Would the U.S. be able to separate the terrorists from the rebels?
I think you're asking hypotheticals on this. You know, what we wanted to see is we wanted to see both sides make a concerted effort and exert influence where they could. You know, and according to our view, according to, as you can tell, our action today, we do not believe that Russia did that.
What is the U.S. strategy in Syria now without cooperation with Russia?
So, as I noted, it's the bilateral discussions with Russia. The suspension has happened. We will continue to talk with members of the international community through other multilateral fora. In terms of next steps, in terms of where we go, you know, this happened today. I'm not going to get into hypotheticals on where we may be, but I do want to be clear that we've had these discussions within the U.S. government across the whole range of facets of U.S. power. We continue to have these discussions with partners and allies. One more? Go ahead.
Back to Syria, just
Of course
very
you can.
quickly, because your counterpart over the weekend at the Russian Foreign Ministry said that an attempted attack or an attack on the Syrian army or Syrian military or bases or Damascus and so on will cause something akin to tectonic shifts or something like this in the Middle East. I wonder if you saw the comment.
I saw the comments. Our focus in Syria has always been on fighting ISIL. Our focus is on fighting Daesh. You know, I'm not going to clarify or speak to her comments.
What does
I'm
that mean, tectonic shifts? It will cause
You know,
tectonic shifts.
I would have a very different job if I could read the Russians' minds. Thanks, guys.